Hello, happy Tuesday. Katie Kimball from Kids Cook Real Food here. And, we're coming up toward the holidays here, which is that time of togetherness, the time of family, and we want to spend time with our kids. And then sometimes reality hits and we realize that our kids are driving us nuts. And I think that happens probably very, very often in the kitchen, right? We have this vision of baking Christmas cookies with the kids and frosting them, and sometimes it goes smashingly well. And we're able to just like look at our beautiful children making those little messes and give such gratitude and be so happy that we're able to have these experiences and build these memories with them. And then other times our brains just sort of melt and leak out of our ears and we go, that didn't go as well as I'd hoped. Now, we want to make sure that our kids also have good memories, right? So, how can we set ourselves up for success when we are inviting our kids into the kitchen, when we are saying yes, when we're taking some steps to actually teaching them to cook and building some skills and some competency and some confidence? What can we do to set ourselves up for success so that not only do they actually learn, but we have a good experience and we all feel good on the other end? Okay, so the basics, whether we're cooking or baking, anytime the kids are coming into the kitchen. 5 hot tips from the National Voice of Healthy Kids Cooking, me. All right, I have taught over 20,000 families, which is, and then freebies, like with probably 50 to 100,000 kids have taken some of our classes and gone through our programs. So this is coming from a place of I've been there and I've done that and I've seen how people fail, myself included in the kitchen. Okay, so step number 1 is that we need to focus on skills, not recipes. Okay, because, and this is like long-term thinking, because if we just teach our kids how to make a recipe, it's kind of like teaching them how to read a book by memorizing it. There's a place for this, and it's okay, and maybe that is your first step actually, right? But when we think about like, isn't it so cute? It's so cute when your little 3-year-old picks up Go Dog Go and they read it from memory. Well, Go Dog Go, that's a bad example because that's the longest book in the world, right? Oh, maybe what's a better example? I think one of mine, one of my memories of our little ones was the Three Billy Goats gruff. Who's that trip trapping over my bridge? Right? They're so cute. They're doing the voices, they're turning the pages, they're looking down. But are they reading? Psh, no, they're not reading. It's a wonderful stepping stone to reading, and it's a piece of the process and piece of the puzzle, but it's not reading. So we need to make sure that if we're teaching a recipe, that we understand it is not the end game, right? That is maybe a stepping stone to the process, but if you're teaching a recipe, you're doing it at a 3-year-old level, okay? So maybe for a 3-year-old, that's what you should do. If you've got an 8, 9, or 10-year-old, I don't recommend just teaching a recipe in isolation because that's just memorization. And that's something they can repeat and it may build their confidence, but I really want you to focus on the skills. So even if you're coming into the kitchen to make a recipe, maybe it's some sugar cookies for Christmas, or maybe it's, some homemade ranch dressing because that's something that you make on a regular basis. I want you to make sure that you isolate the skills and consciously and intentionally teach those as part of your process. Okay, so let's say you're doing some holiday baking. You bring the kids in, and you know in your heart of hearts that you don't just want them to be involved in the spreading on the frosting and the shaking on the sprinkles. You know that you want them to be involved in the creation of the dish, right? Of the recipe. It's not really a dish, of the dessert. And so, what kinds of skills go into making sugar cookies? Well, reading a recipe, measuring with teaspoons, measuring with measuring cups, which are different, potentially measuring with a liquid measuring cup, yet another skill, potentially measuring fat instead of like a dry ingredient into a measuring cup. Now we're up to 5 skills already. They need to know how to stir, which in itself may be multiple skills. You may need to teach how to cream butter and sugar with a stand mixer or a hand mixer. You may need to teach how to fold in, some chocolate chips or something at the end. You definitely want to teach in any case how to look for a uniform mixture, right? How do you know when you're done? What are we up to? I kind of lost count. I think we're on 8 or 9 different skills. And I think we're still in the bowl. We're still in the bowl. Our dough is still in the bowl. We just barely finished the dough, right? Now we might need to roll out the dough. That's number 10. We might need to cut and jiggle and figure out how to move to the tray. 11. Number 12 is how to use the oven, right? amazing. And then we got to spread. If we're doing frosting, that spreading is a skill in and of itself, right? So the good and the bad. It's easy to say, oh my goodness, Katie, now you just gave me 13 things to do instead of one. However, I also may have just given you two things to do. Maybe you want your kids side along with you in the kitchen and you're just going to teach two skills today. Doesn't that sound less oppressive and less scary than teaching how to make a whole recipe? Okay. Plus, when they learn those skills, they can extrapolate onto other recipes, right? They can reuse those skills. They are actual tools in their toolbox instead of just knowing how to make one thing. So, skills, not recipes, is absolutely our philosophy here at Kids Cook Real Food. And that's absolutely your first step as you are teaching your kids to cook or just saying, yes, come on into the kitchen and bake with me. That leads directly into number 2, which is to break things down into tiny pieces. In some ways, better even than saying, yes, come help me make this recipe, is what if I took one of those 13 skills that I know I will need on the weekend to make the sugar cookies, and what if I grab my 5-year-old or my 7-year-old right after they've eaten after school snack, when they're happiest and they haven't started playing yet and I'm not interrupting anything, and what if I just taught them how to measure a teaspoon of salt or sugar, dry things, right? What if I taught them just how to measure a measuring cup of flour? That, first of all, it takes 5 minutes. Second of all, it's building skills and building success for that weekend baking memory, right? You can just teach a kid how to flip pancakes. Again, break these skills down into tiny pieces, teach them one at a time, and now you've got 5-minute tasks instead of an hour task. And I know 5 minutes can be hard to come by to parents, but at least it's easier to digest. It's easier to accept for us as busy parents that maybe I can do a 5-minute task, right? I had a neighbor once was helping me practice a speech, one of my TEDx speeches, and she said, I never thought of it like that before. Like teaching my kids to cook sounded like this huge process, very overwhelming. But teaching my kid to measure a teaspoon of salt, I can do that. I said, yeah, that's the beauty of skills, not recipes. And number 2, breaking it down and teaching one at a time, even outside the recipe. Number 3 is to help your poor brain and to help your interactions with your kids be less stressful. And that is with our little ones, especially 5 and under, we've got to give them lots of grace. I really want you to kind of lower your expectations for them, accept that they're going to make some messes because their small motor skills are simply not as developed as they need to be to do things like measuring perfectly flat, right? Stirring perfectly without spilling. I always tell parents, if you want to know your kids' small motor skills, have them brush your teeth and you'll immediately realize why it's more difficult for them. You'll build that empathy, okay? And I'm not saying don't ask them to help. I'm just saying accept the fact that they are in process learners, right? They will not get it perfectly. Now, with our bigger kids, sometimes we make the equal but opposite mistake and we still sort of just expect them to measure or to stir things that we have dumped, right? I call it the dump and stir baking process with mom and dad. With our bigger kids, once they can read, parents, raise that bar. Get them up at the stove, get them doing the hard things. If they can read and write full paragraphs and interact and have social lives outside of you, oh, my friends, they can do more in the kitchen. Okay, so I really want to encourage you to raise that bar because they can do it. Everyone in the family wins when we ask a little more of our kids. First, we get more help. Second, they get more practical life skills.